The final line of code compiled cleanly, the satisfying green checkmark popping up on my monitor just as the Austin sunset painted the sky outside my downtown apartment window in strokes of fiery orange and purple. Another late Friday, another complex cloud migration project successfully navigated. There was a certain sterile beauty to the logic of it all, identifying dependencies, anticipating failure points, architecting systems designed for resilience. It was the kind of predictable order I craved, a stark contrast to the often messy inefficiency of human relationships, especially family ones. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, rolling my shoulders to ease the tension that always settled there after hours hunched over a keyboard. As a senior systems architect at a rapidly growing tech firm, my days were a whirlwind of high-stakes problem-solving. I thrived on it, built a life out of it, a life characterized by competence, independence, and, if I was honest, a carefully guarded emotional distance. Just as I contemplated ordering celebratory takeout sushi, my phone buzzed on the desk. Mom. A familiar mix of duty and weariness washed over me. "Hey, Mom," I answered, trying to keep my voice light. "Nathaniel, darling." Barbara Holloway's voice came through, laced with its usual blend of gentle anxiety and implicit expectation. "Sorry to bother you, dear. I know you must be exhausted after your week, but your father and I were trying to figure out that online banking portal again. Honestly, it's like trying to decipher ancient hieroglyphics." A light laugh that didn't quite mask the underlying request. "Richard thinks we might have missed a payment somewhere, and I just can't make heads or tails of their new layout. Could you possibly just take a quick look for us when you have a moment? Make sure everything's set up right?" "Sure, Mom," I sighed internally, but kept my voice even. "No problem. Send me the updated login info again if you changed it. I can look this weekend." This was routine. For years, I'd been the designated tech support, financial organizer, and general problem solver for my parents. Richard, a former mid-level manager who took early retirement after a health scare, considered himself above such mundane digital tasks. Barbara, bless her heart, treated any online form like a potential landmine. And my younger sister, Olivia. Well, Olivia was an artist, a photographer with perpetually emerging talent, and a knack for avoiding anything resembling financial responsibility. She was the free spirit. I was the safety net. It had always been this way. Later that Saturday morning, fueled by strong coffee, I logged into their primary bank and financial management portal. The interface was clunky but familiar. I navigated through bill pay settings, confirmed automatic payments for the mortgage and utilities, scanned recent transactions. Everything seemed in order, no missed payments. Richard had likely just misplaced a confirmation email. But as I clicked around, ensuring all linked accounts were properly synced, my eye caught a notification in the Secure Document Center. Estate plan documents updated, October 15th. Just a few weeks ago. Curiosity, or perhaps just the ingrained thoroughness of an architect ensuring all system components are accounted for, made me click. I had helped them set up the initial digital access years ago. My credentials still had permission. I wasn't snooping, I told myself, just verifying. The main document was titled Richard and Barbara Holloway Irrevocable Living Trust. I opened the PDF standard legal language, designations of successor trustees, and then the distribution clauses upon the death of the second grantor. My breath caught. I scrolled down, reading slowly, then faster, my heart beginning a low, heavy thrum against my ribs. The house in the suburbs, their modest but comfortable nest egg, the brokerage account I knew held some decent blue-chip stocks. All designated to flow into a subtrust. The Olivia Holloway Supplemental Needs Trust. Established, the document stated, to provide for Olivia's health, education, maintenance, and support, recognizing her career as an artist often left her financially vulnerable. And for me, Nathaniel Holloway? I scanned further down, stomach clenching. There it was, a specific bequest. To our beloved son Nathaniel, whose independence and success we have always admired, we leave the sum of $10,000, $10,000 en boin, along with the grandfather clock currently situated in the living room as a token of our deep affection. $10,000 and a clock. Compared to the value of the house alone, let alone the investments, it was less than a rounding error, a token, an afterthought. There was even a meticulously worded clause explaining their rationale. We trust Nathaniel understands our decision, knowing his resourcefulness and established career provide him with security, while Olivia requires more substantial long-term support. Our love for both our children is, of course, equal. Equal. The word mocked me from the screen. I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles turning white. This wasn't a hypothetical plan drafted years ago. This was recent, updated just weeks ago. They had looked at their assets, considered their children, and deliberately, consciously decided to effectively disinherit the son who had spent the better part of a decade ensuring they had assets to bequeath in the first place. Memories flooded back, sharp and unwelcome. The time I'd co-signed Olivia's lease for her trendy loft apartment after her last artistic venture failed, a loan she conveniently forgot to repay. The countless weekends I'd spent fixing leaky faucets or troubleshooting computer issues at their house because hiring someone was an unnecessary expense. The loans to cover the unexpected bills. The down payment assistance I quietly provided for their last car purchase. All of it done willingly, if sometimes wearily, under the assumption of shared familial responsibility of eventual fairness. And this was the result. My independence, my success, the very things I'd worked relentlessly for, often sacrificing personal time, were being used as justification to cut me out. Olivia's lack of success, her cultivated helplessness, was being rewarded with everything. A cold, hard knot formed in my chest, the kind that logic couldn't easily unravel. This wasn't just about money. It was about value, about acknowledgement, about the stunning, brutal clarity of seeing exactly where I stood in the carefully constructed narrative of the Holloway family. I was the reliable infrastructure, essential but unseen, taken for granted. Olivia was the project worthy of investment. I methodically finished checking the automated payments, my fingers moving automatically across the keyboard. I logged out of their portal, the click of the mouse echoing in the sudden silence of my apartment. The Austin sunshine streamed through the window, bright and indifferent. But inside, a switch had been flipped. The system architecture of my family, I now realized, was fundamentally flawed, built on a foundation of inequity I could no longer ignore. And I, the architect, knew exactly what happened when a system's core integrity was compromised. It required a complete overhaul. The screensaver eventually flickered onto my monitor, casting shifting geometric patterns across my stunned face, but I didn't move for a long time. The initial shock wave had passed, leaving behind not the heat of anger, but the cold, sharp clarity of a system analysis revealing a critical design flaw. The data was irrefutable. The estate plan, updated recently, clearly demonstrated my parents' calculated decision to channel the entirety of their significant assets towards Olivia, using my own financial independence as the justification for my near-total exclusion. My mind, trained to identify patterns and logical inconsistencies, started piecing things together. Their casual reliance on me wasn't just parental dependence. It was strategic resource allocation. Their praise for my resourcefulness wasn't admiration. It was justification. Their indulgence of Olivia's artistic temperament wasn't just support. It was grooming her for the role of primary beneficiary. And the uncomfortable truth settled in. I wasn't just the safety net. I was the unwitting primary funding source for the very legacy I was being written out of. Because there was something else. Something significant they likely didn't fully grasp, or perhaps conveniently chose to ignore. The Holloway Supplemental Income Fund. As I privately dryly called it in my own records, years ago, seeing my father's precarious early retirement and my mother's lack of financial planning, I had started setting aside a portion of my own significant tech salary. Not gifts, not loans they'd forget, but disciplined investments into a diversified portfolio under my name, legally mine, but structured so the dividends and interest payments flowed quietly into an account they could access. It was my solution, providing them a substantial safety cushion without relinquishing control or exposing the funds to Olivia's erratic spending. They knew about the account, of course, the one that magically received funds every quarter, but I suspect they believed it was simply Nate helping out, or perhaps some obscure benefit from Richard's former employer that I managed. They never asked about the source or the total value content in its reliable appearance. That fund, grown considerably over the years through careful management and reinvestment, was now the crux of the matter. It represented years of my sacrifice, my earnings, my foresight, and according to their own recently documented plan, none of its eventual principal generated by my labor was intended to benefit me or acknowledge my contribution. My decision wasn't born of pique or a desire for immediate confrontation. That would be messy, emotional, inefficient, everything my logical brain recoiled from. No, this required a strategic correction, a quiet reallocations of resources based on the revealed parameters of the system. Monday morning, before even logging into my work systems, I made 2 calls. The first was to Sarah Chen, my longtime financial advisor. The second was to David Miller, an estate planning attorney I consulted a few years back when setting up my own affairs. I explained the situation calmly, factually, stripping away the emotional overlay. Sarah, regarding the HSIF portfolio, I need to restructure the disbursement protocol immediately. All dividends and interest are to be redirected to my primary checking account, effective starting the next cycle. No exceptions. To David, the conversation was similar. David, I need verification on the ownership structure of a specific brokerage account under my sole tax ID. I established it years ago with the intent of providing beneficial interest to my parents, but circumstances have changed. I need to ensure my sole legal ownership and control are ironclad and immediately severs any informal beneficiary, access, or assumptions. Both Sarah and David, professionals accustomed to complex financial arrangements and the unfortunate realities of family dynamics, understood immediately. There were digital forms to sign, instructions to confirm via secure portals. The process was clinical, efficient, and entirely legal. It was simply me reclaiming full control over assets that had always been mine, generated by my income, under my name. The only thing changing was the quiet, unacknowledged flow of benefits their way. By lunchtime, it was done. The quarterly dividend payment due next month would not appear in their account. The system had been reconfigured. There was no sense of triumph, no vindictive pleasure, just a heavy, grim sense of necessity. It felt like decommissioning a legacy system that had proven fundamentally insecure. It was a boundary drawn not in anger, but in cold, hard logic. They had defined the terms of our future relationship in that trust document. I was simply adjusting my own system architecture accordingly. This wasn't an argument. It was the quiet click of a firewall rule being irrevocably updated. Point of no return. The digital confirmations from Sarah and David landed in my inbox with quiet finality. Fund disbursements rerouted, ownership controls verified and locked down. It was done. Sitting there, bathed in the glow of my multiple monitors displaying complex system diagrams, I felt a strange detachment. It wasn't the catharsis I might have expected, more like the quiet satisfaction of resolving a critical vulnerability in a long-running unstable system. The Holloway family operating system, I thought with a humorless internal smirk, had finally revealed its flawed core logic, and I had just implemented the necessary patch, a hard boundary. To understand why reclaiming that fund felt less like revenge and more like a necessary system correction, you have to understand the role I'd been assigned since childhood. I was Nate, the responsible one, the fixer, the one who didn't cause trouble. Growing up, our household operated on an unspoken set of rules. Olivia, my younger sister by 4 years, was the designated creative soul. Her moods were catered to, her artistic whims indulged. A messy room was part of her process. A failed school project was because the teacher didn't understand her vision. She was encouraged to explore, to feel, to express, with little regard for practicalities like budgets or deadlines. She was allowed to be fragile, mercurial, perpetually finding herself. I, on the other hand, was expected to be the bedrock. My good grades weren't celebrated. They were anticipated. When the lawnmower broke, teenage me was expected to figure out how to fix it, which usually involved downloading manuals and ordering parts online. When Olivia forgot her major term paper until the night before, I was the one coaxed into helping her research and outline while she stressed about the emotional toll it was taking on her. I learned early to suppress my own needs, to keep things running smoothly, because any disruption was met with parental sighs and anxious glances, implying I was adding to their burdens. The financial disparity started young. While I had a paper route and later worked part-time jobs through high school to save for college essentials, Olivia received generous allowances for art supplies, photography equipment, always the latest model, and trips to find inspiration. When I hesitantly asked my parents about help with a down payment for my first reliable used car, essential for commuting to my demanding university program and internship, my father lectured me on fiscal responsibility. You need to learn the value of $1, Nathaniel. Build your own way. Weeks later, they happily co-signed a loan for Olivia to buy a brand new hatchback because her old one didn't match her aesthetic anymore. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, yet utterly normalized within our family unit. My parents, Richard and Barbara, weren't intentionally cruel. They operated under a flawed belief system common among a certain generation of educated middle class. They valued traditional markers of success, but romanticized artistic struggle, as long as someone else, namely me, was ensuring the bills got paid. They saw my quiet competence not as something to be equally nurtured, but as a resource to be relied upon, freeing them to focus their anxieties and financial support on Olivia, the vulnerable one. My tech career, while undeniably successful, was treated with a vague suspicion. All that time staring at screens, Nate, it can't be healthy. Are you sure these stock options are stable? They understood literature and history. They didn't understand cloud architecture or SaaS business models. And their lack of understanding bred a subtle dismissal. The idea for the secret investment fund emerged about 7 years ago. My father's early retirement wasn't entirely voluntary. His company downsized, and his health scare provided a convenient narrative. His pension was modest, and I realized with dawning horror that their savings were nowhere near adequate for the long term, especially given their spending habits and Olivia's perpetual state of financial emergence. Panic wasn't my style. Analysis was. Giving them lump sums was out. I knew it would either be mismanaged or siphoned off by Olivia for her latest project. Setting up direct bill pay covered immediate needs, but didn't build long-term security or account for unexpected expenses. So I devised a different solution. Leveraging my significantly higher income and knowledge of investment strategies, I started diverting a substantial portion of my post-tax earnings into a carefully managed brokerage account under my name and social security number. I treated it like another system build. Initial capital injection, regular contributions, my deployments, a diversified portfolio allocation, risk mitigation, automated reinvestment, compounding growth. I set up automated quarterly transfers of the generated income, dividends, interest, to a separate checking account they could access, framing it vaguely as returns from some investments I managed for us. It was the perfect engineer's solution, provide the necessary output, stable income supplement, while retaining full control over the core infrastructure, the capital. It protected the principal from mismanagement while giving them the security I felt obligated to provide. Over the years, the fund grew substantially, far exceeding what they likely imagined. The quarterly deposits became a reliable, expected part of their budget. Did they ever ask where exactly it came from? Not really. Did they question why Nate's investments were so consistently profitable? It was easier, I suppose, to accept the magic income without probing too deeply. It fit their narrative of Nate, the capable provider, taking care of things. And I let them believe it. Part of me, I now admit, perhaps needed to feel needed, to fulfill that ingrained role of the responsible son. Part of me genuinely worried about their future, but a larger part simply saw it as the most efficient way to manage a flawed system with minimal friction. Until I saw that trust document, the cold legal language stating that all their assets significantly shored up and maintained indirectly by the income generated from my fund, would bypass me entirely. My own success, fueled by the same work ethic that generated the secret fund, was weaponized as the reason for my exclusion. The system wasn't just flawed, it was designed to exploit its most critical component. Reclaiming the fund wasn't about punishment, it was about restoring balance. It was about acknowledging the truth they refused to see, that the foundation they were planning to bestow solely on Olivia was largely built with materials I had provided, under the assumption of a shared structure. That assumption had just been proven false. The patch was implemented. Now, it was just a matter of time before the system registered the change. The weeks following my quiet reconfiguration of the investment fund passed with an almost unsettling normalcy. Work was demanding, Austin's tech scene was buzzing, and I immersed myself in finalizing a complex system deployment. I didn't reach out to my parents or Olivia, and pointedly, they didn't reach out to me beyond the usual superficialities. A group text chain sharing a bland news article, a forwarded meme from Olivia that I ignored. It was the familiar pattern of low-level, low-effort connection we'd fallen into, and for a while, it seemed the massive shift I'd initiated had gone entirely unnoticed. I knew, however, it was merely the quiet before the system registered the input error. The quarterly dividend and interest distribution date, a date I knew as well as my own birthday, having set up the initial transfers myself, came and went at the end of November. I saw the substantial deposit land securely in my primary brokerage account. Their linked checking account received nothing. Silence. For 3 days, nothing. Perhaps they assumed a bank delay, a processing lag, or perhaps more likely, their financial oversight was so lax they hadn't even noticed yet. Then inevitably, my phone rang on the 4th day. Mom. Nate, honey. Barbara's voice was cheerful, almost unnaturally so. Just calling to chat. How was your week? Anything exciting happening with that big project you mentioned? We exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes, the weather, a brief mention of Dad's golf game. Then came the carefully casual pivot. Oh, by the way, dear, she added, her tone just a fraction too light. Did you happen to notice if that deposit came through? The one from, your investments. It usually shows up around now, but Richard couldn't see it this morning. Here it was. I kept my voice level, injecting a note of mild, detached surprise. Oh, right. Actually, Mom, I restructured some of my personal portfolio management recently. That particular income stream isn't flowing the same way anymore. A pause on the other end. Not flowing the same way? She repeated, the cheerfulness instantly evaporating, replaced by a tremor of confusion. What does that mean, Nathaniel? Is there a problem? No problem on my end, I said calmly. Just made some adjustments to my long-term financial strategy. Anyway, how's Olivia's latest photography exhibit planning going? I deliberately changed the subject. The deflection worked momentarily. Mom stammered through a brief update on Olivia's perpetually upcoming show, before ending the call with a strained, "We'll talk soon, dear." But I knew the alarm bells were ringing. The follow-up came faster than I expected. An email from my father that evening, unusually direct for him. Subject: Financial query. Nathaniel, your mother mentioned a change regarding the supplemental income account. Could you please clarify the nature of these adjustments? As you know, we factor that income into our monthly budget. Dad. Richard. I considered crafting a detailed reply, but opted for brevity and continued ambiguity. Dad, it relates to personal asset reallocation. The previous disbursement structure is no longer active. Nate. The response was a near instantaneous phone call from Richard. I let it go to voicemail. The message was curt, irritation bleeding through his forced politeness. Nathaniel, call me back immediately. We need to discuss this reallocation. Then came the text, a frantic volley from both parents over the next 48 hours. Mom. Nate, what does this mean? We rely on that money. Dad. This is unacceptable. You need to explain yourself. Mom. Did something happen to the investments? Did you lose it? Please tell us. Dad. If this is some kind of power play, Nathaniel, it's incredibly immature. They still didn't get it. They thought the money itself was theirs. That I was merely the manager, perhaps even implying I'd been irresponsible or had lost their funds. The concept that the underlying capital was, and always had been, mine seemed utterly beyond their comprehension. Then Olivia entered the fray. Her text arrived late one night, dripping with wounded artistry and second-hand panic. Olivia. Nate. WTF? Mom and Dad are freaking out. What did you do with their support money? You can't just cut them off. They need that. Olivia. It was never their support money, I typed back, hitting send before I could second-guess the directness. It was income generated from my personal assets, which I chose to share. I've made different choices now. Her reply was swift, indignant. Olivia. OMG, you're unbelievable. So you're just keeping it all for yourself now? After everything they did for you? That's so selfish. They need that money to live. Olivia. Then perhaps, I responded coolly, it's time for you to contribute, given you're inheriting everything else. Radio silence from her after that. But the family communication lines, I knew, would be buzzing. The narrative was undoubtedly being crafted. Nate, the successful but cold-hearted son, had suddenly, inexplicably, turned greedy and cut off his loving, dependent parents and struggling artist sister out of spite. Confirmation came a few days later via a text from my cousin Megan, who lived back in my parents' hometown. Megan. Hey, Nate, weird question. Aunt Barbara called my mom yesterday, really upset. Said you'd stopped helping them financially, and something about investments. Everything okay? Just checking in. Nate. Hey, Megan. Appreciate you checking in. It's a complex family matter, but essentially I've reclaimed control over my own personal assets. Their portrayal might be a bit skewed. Hope you're doing well. I kept it polite, factual, but planted the seed that their story wasn't the whole truth. The pressure continued. More voicemails filled with guilt. We raised you better than this, Nathaniel. Please, just help us through the holidays, son. And veiled threats. People are starting to talk about how you're treating us. And they even tried involving my father's brother, Uncle David, who called with a stern, patriarchal tone, advising me to do the right thing by your parents. I held firm, refusing to jade. Justify, argue, defend, or explain over the phone or text. Each refusal, each boundary maintained, seemed to fuel their bewilderment and anger. They couldn't comprehend a system where their demands were no longer met, where the infrastructure they took for granted was no longer serving their needs exclusively. The smear campaign was irritating but predictable. It was also ineffective against the firewall I was building. They were broadcasting their panic and entitlement, unaware that I held the system logs, the proof of ownership, the irrefutable data that would expose the fundamental flaw in their entire narrative. The question wasn't if I would reveal it, but how and when for maximum clarity and minimal emotional expenditure. The strategist in me was already planning the next deployment. The escalating barrage from my family, the guilt trips disguised as concern, the passive-aggressive social media posts, the whispers painting me as cold and greedy, finally solidified something within me. It wasn't anger anymore. It felt more like the final diagnostic check confirming a critical system failure. Their narrative was fundamentally corrupt, built on flawed data and on willful omissions. Continuing to engage on their terms, or even maintaining silence, would only allow the corruption to spread. It required a definitive, documented correction. I didn't relish the thought, but the need for clarity outweighed my desire to simply disengage. I called David Miller, my attorney, again. David, I explained, the informal approach isn't working. They're attempting to rewrite the history of my financial contributions, while simultaneously demanding their continuation. I need to present the facts, formally and irrefutably. We discussed the best approach, not an emotional confrontation, but a clear, concise presentation of evidence delivered with the unambiguous weight of legal correspondence. David drafted the letter, ensuring it was precise and objective. It laid bare the truth of the investment fund, its origin solely from my earnings, its legal ownership under my name, backed by summarized statements and confirmations. It also, with surgical precision, included key excerpts from their own recently updated trust document, letting the stark contrast between their plans for my inheritance and their reliance on my financial support speak for itself. Finally, it stated firmly that my decision regarding my personal assets was final, closing the door on future financial pleas related to this matter. The thick envelope, sent via certified mail, felt like deploying a final necessary security patch. There was a quiet gravity to signing off on it, a sense of closing a chapter I had long been weary of reading. What followed was not an explosion, but a profound and sudden silence. The frantic calls ceased. The manipulative text stopped. The social media whispers died down. It was as if their entire communication system, predicated on my assumed compliance and their controlled narrative, had encountered an unrecoverable error upon receiving documented proof of reality. That silence was more telling than any angry outburst could have been. Life began to feel different, lighter. The low-frequency hum of familial obligation that had underscored my existence for so long simply faded away. I didn't seek out news of them, but inevitably fragments reached me, filtered through the cautious updates from Cousin Megan. Her tone had shifted subtly after I had shared the core facts documented in David's letter. She mentioned casually during a call weeks later a note of a neutral observation replacing her earlier confusion, that she heard Uncle Richard and Aunt Barbara are talking to a realtor. Something about downsizing, and Olivia's been asking around about graphic design jobs, apparently. Downsizing. Olivia seeking actual employment. The system, deprived of its unacknowledged external funding, was being forced to adjust to its own internal resources. There was no satisfaction in hearing it, only a distant affirmation that the boundary I'd set was holding. With the mental bandwidth freed up from managing their crises, both real and manufactured, I found myself reinvesting in my own life. The trip to Japan, once a distant someday item, became a reality. I walked through ancient Kyoto temples, lost myself in the organized chaos of Tokyo, feeling the knots of long-held tension slowly unwind. Back in Austin, I threw myself into mentoring junior engineers at work, finding a genuine spark in helping them navigate the complex systems I loved, guiding their growth. The idea of launching my own consulting firm resurfaced, no longer seeming impractical, but exhilaratingly possible. One evening, reviewing my personal finances online, my eyes landed on the investment account previously earmarked for my parents. Its performance was strong, unburdened. On impulse, I edited the account nickname, deleted the mental tag of Holloway Supplemental Income, typed in simply, Nate, Future. It felt right. Definitive. The formal letter from my parents, the one filled with strained regret and calls for forgiveness without accountability, remained unanswered in its file box. Their silence continued. Whether it stemmed from shame, anger, or simply the dawning uncomfortable reality of their situation, I didn't know. And I realized with a startling sense of peace that I no longer needed to. My legacy wasn't tied to their validation or their flawed estate plan. It was in the systems I built, the problems I solved, the life I was now free to architect for myself based on my own designs. They had made their choice clear in that trust document. My final action was simply accepting that choice and reconfiguring my own system accordingly. The quiet afterward wasn't emptiness. It was the clean, uncluttered space needed to build something new, something entirely my own. Was it the right way? For me, it was the only way. What do you think?